Welcome back. Another edition of Big Time Memories coming at you. I'm Terry Sullivan along with fellow Hall of Famer Dave Drayson.
Thank you. Welcome fans to another edition of episode of our show. Hope you're enjoying them as much as we are presenting them to you.
Just a blast every time.
Boy, we're having fun. We're learning things that, every time that I didn't know. With your research, my research, we're having fun. Let's have some more fun today.
By golly, you curly-headed devil, you.
Oh, boy. I know who you're talking about.
My gosh.
Big Tex Mckenzie.
Tex Mckenzie, we're featuring him today. Frank Hugh Mckenzie. He was born July 21st, 1930 in Edmonds, Washington. He was a big one right out of the getter.
Yes, he was
6'10". There's a lot of ring work. Everybody say he was a little awkward in there.
A little.
But as awkward as he was a big fan favorite no matter where he appeared.
Yeah, and at 6'10", he came along in an era when that was really out of the ordinary. Today, they're everywhere, but back then it was very unusual, especially in some parts of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when Tex he really got his nickname because he was into rodeo when he was a kid, bronco busting, riding the horses. He did it all. Won ribbons, awards, and everything in his youth. But at one point, he ran into a gentleman on the East Coast named Jack Pfeffer.
Ooh, infamous
promoter. Carnival
Impresario.
promoter. Yeah, who he used to take to combat the other promotions who were doing bigger, who were using Bruno Sammartino. He would, have a wrestler and he'd change his name to Bruno Sammartino.
Yeah.
He would have another gentleman, against Bobo Brazil. He'd have Hobo Brazil.
That's right.
So he would do these carnival kind of things on, the East Coast that, weren't well received by other promoters, but he made a big success for himself.
He did, yeah. And certainly anybody he trained and put his stamp of approval on, you knew was going to be used well.
Yeah. But Big Tex, he made his debut June 14th, 1950, but not as Tex Mckenzie.
No.
He was known as Goliath.
No kidding.
Yeah, probably from, his big stature.
Yeah,
and he
know that.
went against a gentleman named Chael Martinez down in Texas. And over his career, his early parts of his career, he had other names. I mean, he couldn't use this Goliath thing all along. He ended up using the names Tex Mckenzie, Hugh Mckenzie, Davy Crockett Mckenzie, and Dakota Mack.
Another one he used that I came across was Sky High Mckenzie.
Really?
There was another wrestler at the time, big star, named Sky High Lee.
Yeah.
So that's, I suspect, where that came from.
Yeah, in his beginning, in his wrestling career in the 1950s, he appeared in California a lot. Even though he was, from Washington State, he ventured down to California and he made it big. Oh, he was big down there. Always main eventing, everywhere from, San Francisco, L.A., and the, San Bernardino, all those, towns.
He was the Andre the Giant of his day because at that time somebody 6'10" was just an anomaly. Just really stood out.
And he ventured east, and of all places, in Toronto, Canada, for the Tunnies, Frank Tunney. He was a big star in Toronto in the 50s and very early 60s. And then somehow he hooked up with Jim Barnett, and he went down to Australia, of all things, from 1964 through 1969. And he became a huge star there also. I mean, he was becoming a worldwide main event star all across the country and the world. Mm-hmm. And he made his Detroit debut on August 8th, 1964. Against Big Moose Cholak.
The Moose.
Oh, so, when Tex got back into the dressing room after that bout, he was hurting for certain.
Yeah, I bet.
But then, he didn't come back, to Detroit for the longest time. It took him 6 years before he came back. And he made his debut back in 1970, where he became a mainstay for big time wrestling. Up until 1973, I mean, he went against them all. He went against, Killer Brooks. He went against the Sheik. Just classic battle. Pampero Firpo.
Oh, yeah.
Bull Curry.
Classics, yeah.
Being as tall as he was, towering over these other guys, they were able to handle Big Tex. And, Tex, oh, God, he was just a great in-ring performer. Fans just loved him.
Yeah. And not only was he a great performer in the ring, also at ringside as a commentator. When Lord Layton went to Australia for about a year, something like that, was when I got my start with big time wrestling on television. And Lord Layton had gone for a year. The commentator was Chuck Allen and Tex Mckenzie, and I was the ring announcer.
Oh boy, those had to be fun times,
They
working
were.
with him.
Yeah, Tex had the frilly tuck shirt. Yeah,
I remember one of his sayings all the time on promos, when he'd be going, coming in for a big bout. Oh, Lordy, I'd shoot my horse to get there.
Yeah, he was always coming up with, he always had his way with
Texisms.
words. Yeah, Texisms. One time, I can remember, it might have been that first television taping that we did. We'd do Cobo on a Saturday night, and then the next morning, Sunday morning, go out to Walled Lake to Channel 20 or 62, whatever it was. And this particular time was around the holidays, and there was a month in between cards. So we taped 4 one-hour television shows to fill the 4 weeks between Cobo shows. So this was the day after Tex had just wrestled, I don't know, Firpo or the Sheik, and he had a bandage over his forehead, and he came out on week 1, and he says to Chuck, he says, that Sheik put a hurting on me. He said, I got 6 stitches in my head because of the Sheik. Okay, fast forward to week 2. Yeah, that Sheik put a hurting on me. I've got 12 stitches in my head, Chuck Allen. Week 3, we were up to 24. By the time week 4 came around, I got 72 stitches in my noggin.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that Tex, he was something else.
Yeah.
And in the ring, I just remember, when he got that headlock on, his opponent in the corner, you knew it was coming.
Yeah.
That big bulldog headlock.
Yeah.
And then, one of my other favorites is that, he'd get a opponent in a leg scissors. And then he'd, be behind them and he'd be twinking their ears or, give them a wet willy.
Yeah.
And then he'd, smack them in the side of the head, pick them up and drop them on their keister, in the center of the ring. Fans love that one.
He was a hilarious guy. I often wondered if he was that way 24/7, but pretty much any time I was around him, he was.
Oh, he was always very
upbeat.
friendly, outgoing, always willing to talk to you. He never talked down to you.
No. In fact, he was one of the first of all the wrestlers to really welcome me as part of the fraternity back at the time when I was announcing just in, I think, Mansfield and Sandusky. Everywhere else I went, I wasn't allowed in the dressing room. This is before Cobo. And sometimes I'd find my way back, but Tex was the kind of a guy who knew me from some of the smaller towns. Come on, we're going to the bar afterwards, or come on over to my place afterwards. Well, after the closing time, we'll have a brew. He invited me up to Channel 24 in Toledo one time after the Sports Arena show when they were taping promos. Well, I really wasn't supposed to be there, but there I was because Tex brought me up there. It took me... rode with him and one of his girlfriends at the time, Helene, from Toledo to Dayton. Ton of fun.
Yeah. Oh, he was something. And we talk about his in-ring awkwardness, and so many guys, said that, so many of his opponents would say that. But one story I remember about Texas, he was in a tag team match, a 6-man tag, himself, George, and Sandy Scott. And they were going against 3 heels. I can't remember who. So they're in the center of the ring, for the referee's instructions. And he goes to talk to the referee or something, and he goes like this, and he pokes Sandy Scott right in the eye. And Sandy Scott is holding himself, and he's wandering around, semi-dazed. And now they're going back to their corner, to start the match, and Tex didn't know who was going to start the match. So he thought, he wasn't going to start the match, so he's going out of the ring, through the ropes, and he kicks George Scott right in the head and dazed him. So now you've got Sandy Scott holding his eye, you've got George Scott holding his head. So Tex beat up 2 opponents before the bell even rang.
Wow.
Oh, and I remember this was a great time for me. As a young, kid.
Yeah.
Because Tex left, Big Time Wrestling at the end of 1973. And in 1974, I get a call from Tex Mckenzie, of all people. It's like, So anyway, he knew that I was the photographer at that time, for Big Time Wrestling. So he had a friend because of his love of sailing. They had this big boat. And they were going to do one of these nature kind of films, one of these George Perot kind of things,
right, sure.
up the coast, of Alaska, starting in Seattle and going up the coast. And he called me and asked me if I'd like to come along on this trip to take still photography for him. Wow. And it's like, you know what? I jumped at the chance at that.
Yeah.
They paid for my flight out there. We lived on the boat. Whatever we ate, Tex would, throw his fishing line over, and whatever fish we caught, that's what we ate that night. And every maybe 2-3 days, we'd stop in a, port town for provisions like potatoes and carrots or potato chips, a Pepsi, stuff like that.
Right, sure.
And what a great trip that I had with him on that. It was just a laugh a minute.
I'll bet.
I learned so much about nature and, Alaska, and what an experience that, I couldn't, pay for to have these days.
It's an interesting look at the guy away from the ring. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in 1975, Tex reappears in the wrestling world. He ended up, working for, the IWA? Eddie Einhorn's promotion.
Right.
That, was a rival promotion for, that ran in the South and on the East Coast. He was going against the big guys.
Eddie Einhorn this was his attempt to take a promotion national before McMahon.
Right, exactly. And he had the right connections. He had the money.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the president or something with the Chicago White Sox, and had a big television company in Chicago.
And a lot of the wrestlers he took were from here. Tex,
exactly.
Bulldog Brower, the mighty Igor, Superstar Bill Eadie. The Mongols.
George Cannon.
Yeah, Cannon.
The Love Brothers.
Yeah.
So many of the guys. So it was almost like a big-time wrestling promotion away from big-time wrestling in a way.
And Eddie Einhorn eventually got tired of it, and once he stepped out, it folded.
Yeah, and they brought in the announcer from the Cleveland territory, Jack Reynolds.
Right, yeah.
And at, times Tex was... wrestling, but then, Tex, you got to do something else. So they put him doing
he was
color.
Great on the mic.
Yeah, colored commentary with Jack.
Yeah.
They were a great team.
Yeah.
So that's what he did.
Yeah.
And then, that promotion didn't last but a couple years. And, Tex, finally retired in 1979. And he retired back to his home state of Washington, where he still worked. Of all things, he was building private homes, for people.
Wow.
And he also still had his love for sailing. He, sailed, all around the bays and the sounds of, Washington State and up to Vancouver Island. And unfortunately, while he was on one of his trips on his sailboat in Vancouver Island, he was struck with an aneurysm, and he passed away on his boat on May 31st, 2001.
Wow.
So Tex Mckenzie, revered, loved by the fans, loved by us, of course.
yeah.
Great wrestling career. He's a Hall of Famer in anybody's book.
Yeah, and again, one of those top of your mind when you talk about classic Detroit wrestlers from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, he made a big impact
Yes, he
on,
did.
fans and big-time wrestling.
And all of us. Yeah.
And in closing, Terry, is a custom, if you can make one final ring induction for our big friend, Big Tex McKenzie.
Well, by golly. Ladies and gentlemen, from San Antonio, Texas, weighing 275 pounds, Big Tex McKenzie.
I'm really proud to say that I'm a part of IBW.
I take pride in IBW that we are a family-run company.
It's a fight. It's a sport. At IBW, tradition has always mattered.
You're going to see world-class professional big-time wrestling at its best.
This ain't no sports entertainment. This is professional wrestling.
International Big Time Wrestling's The Fix. Each and every week, your fix of IBW action. You want entertainment? Look no further than RoX-TV. International Big Time Wrestling!
Wrestling fans, if you like what you've seen, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also don't forget to ring that bell.